I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, "To be or not to be." He was in doubt about something. Whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And in my opinion, the young generation of whites, blacks, browns, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused it, and now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.
Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. May 19th is Malcolm X's birthday, and here to celebrate the power of our history, our manhood. We have Herb Boyd today, and he has a book out, Black Detroit, the people's history of self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure Malcolm's all throughout this. Huh?
I would imagine, yes, indeed.
All right.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show, Herb.
It's hot off the press.
Always,
you know, it's kind
always
of
good to have you here, man.
Pub
Always
release on June the 6th.
Okay.
But we're going to kick it off in Detroit, and then hope it kind of gets some traction and resonate across the country.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, a lot of people know that I'm from Detroit,
right?
And you know, they say, well, you're from Detroit, but you're now in Harlem, right?
Right.
But in effect, I never left Detroit. Detroit never left me. And so a lot of this is part memoir, part love letter, and of course, a tremendous and countless number of Detroit griots who taught me. So it's their story as well as my mother, you know, who continues to reside there. Just had her 97th birthday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whoa. Oh, wow.
Yeah,
man.
but she's a living griot, and many of the stories and episodes that I have there, she experienced, going all the way back to 1943, when they had that major riot in the city there. And that was my introduction to Detroit, because I had only been there a couple of months before that riot of 43. And of course, the '67 rebellion is coming up, and it's a lot of attention given to that.
Okay.
They call it a rebellion, not a riot, as opposed to the race riot of 1943. Right. So the 43 riot, 1925, when Dr. Ocean Sweet came to the city. Oh, brother, the Blackburn Affair all the way back to the 1830s. In fact, that started in 1701.
Okay.
You know, a lot of my students figured that I was there, but I was not. And I bring it all the way down to beyond the bankruptcy there, and all of the very, very significant stops and milestones in between. Because a lot of people, when they say Detroit, what's the next word out of your mouth?
Motor City.
Motor City, right. And the second word? Yeah, Motown. You dig it? Motown.
Of course, that's the first one.
It's, of course, Motown and Motor City and the Union Movement and the League of Revolutionary Black Workers and the Shrine of the Black Madonna and Coleman Young and Malcolm X are all there. And it was good seeing that little clip that you had earlier there.
That's Malcolm at the end of his life.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
He died, what, 2 months after that?
Right.
And I always play because that was his transformation from in the early days. We'll show a couple of those clips in the early days where Malcolm really feuded with Martin.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring up the old rivalry that we used to have in the 60s, where we had all these people pulling at two different directions.
Exactly.
You know, we had Martin. So, you know, sit back and lay back and nonviolent. When Malcolm came out, grab your gun and, you know, shoot everybody in sight. Not quite, but
Defend yourself.
Defend yourself, self-defense. Well, that's an important phase. Let me show this clip. Sure. Run number 3, and we'll come back at you. This is Martin and Malcolm in a debate. Which,
the media's coverage of Malcolm versus the real deal.
It was awful.
Number 3. 3. Not 2, 3.
The media's coverage of Malcolm versus the real deal.
It was awful. And so I learned about Malcolm, and I realized that I had been had. I realized that I had
bought what the media had told you.
Yes, I bought it, hook, line, and sinker. But when I...
The white man pays Reverend Martin Luther King, subsidizes Reverend Martin Luther King, so that Reverend Martin Luther King can continue to teach the Negroes to be defenseless. That's what you mean by nonviolent. Be defenseless. Be defenseless in the face of one of the most cruel beasts that has ever taken the people into captivity. That's this American white man. And they have proved it throughout the country by the police dogs and the police clubs. 100 years ago, they used to put on a white sheet and use a bloodhound against Negroes. Today, they have taken off the white sheet and put on police uniforms. They've traded in the bloodhounds for police dogs, and they're still doing the same thing. And just as Uncle Tom, back during slavery, used to keep the Negroes from resisting the bloodhound or resisting the Ku Klux Klan by teaching them to love their enemy or pray for those who use them despitefully, today Martin Luther King is just a 20th century or modern Uncle Tom or a religious Uncle Tom who is doing the same thing today to keep Negroes defenseless in the face of attack that Uncle Tom did on the plantation to keep those Negroes defenseless in the face of the attack of the Klan.
I don't think of love as, in this context, as emotional bosh. I don't think of it as a weak force. But I think of love as something strong and that organizes itself into powerful direct action. This is what I tried to teach in the struggle in the South, that we are not engaged in a struggle that means we sit down and do nothing. That there's a great deal of difference between non-resistance to evil and non-violent resistance. Non-resistance leaves you in a state of stagnant passivity and deadened complacency, wherein non-violent resistance means that you do resist in a very strong and determined manner. And I think some of the criticisms of nonviolence, or some of the critics, fail to realize that we are talking about something very strong, and they confuse non-resistance with nonviolence.
The goal of
what we're trying to show here is the contrast between the two. Malcolm saying, you know, all they want to do is integrate, and we sit at the same table with a man that's persecuted us for the last 400 years. And he didn't sit still for something like that.
You can, you know, you can connect these two clips that you've shown, and it begins to, I think it shows the relationship. If you go back to his appearances, 2 appearances in London, at the Oxford, and then later at the economics, you know, the whole, speaking there at that gathering of scholars. And what he said, you know, during the Oxford debates, they gave him the issue in terms of taking something from Goldwater, when Goldwater gave his, you know, address, you know, at the convention, at the Republican convention in 1964. And at that time, he said, in his concluding remarks, he said something about, you know, extremism in defense of liberty is no vice. And moderation in pursuit of justice is no virtue. And so Malcolm say, oh, that's great, I need that, because it leads right in by any means necessary. And those people, and so he supports the notion of extremism at that point, because it's in defense of liberty. And he took no exception, and anyone who took exception to that, it was sinful. You know, you just didn't do that. Otherwise, it's a defeated people. So when the debate is all over, he lost it. He lost the debate. But of course, you know, you had a different audience there making that decision, and they decided that we're not this kind of radicalism and this kind of extremism. We don't. It's not very popular at that time. So it connects up with what Dr. King and Malcolm are debating later on. You know, so it's really two debates. You know, the debate that he had there in London, and then the kind of discussion and dialogue he had with Dr. King across the years. And obviously, you're absolutely right in terms of the positions that they had. And of course, you know, Malcolm's saying was by any means necessary.
Right.
And he was never a proponent of violence. I think that was a mischaracterization of where he was coming from philosophically, ideologically. He was saying like self-defense. That's what he was talking about.
Right.
And if it meant violence, I guess he could go right back to the extremism. You know, I'm going to protect myself. Right. You know, somebody hit me, I'm going to send him to the cemetery.
Most of us.
Martin was a licensed gun owner. He didn't carry it to the demonstrations.
Right.
But Martin was a licensed gun owner. I remember Reverend Bethany Baptist in Brooklyn, Bill
Jones.
We were sitting around talking one day. You know, he said, "I always carried my pistol." That's the way he talked. Bill Jones. He said, "Big man, like 6'6". I mean,
he was
a massive structure." And he said, "I always carried my pistol. Martin was not willing to carry his, but I wasn't going down like that. If something was going to happen, I wanted to be ready." And
he was a deacon for defense, wasn't he?
But you know, many of the men with Martin, they owned weapons. The March on Washington, that famous picture where you see Martin there with the men with the white kufis on. All of those men were black police officers. And he sought their protection. And one of them was a good friend of mine, Jesse Duke, standing immediately to Martin's right with a thick mustache. He was a transit detective. He was one of the guys that trained me back in the day. So the Black Police Organization, the National Black Police Organization, provided the security for Martin at that event. A. Philip Randolph and all of them. They knew that the propensity for violence was there. Even going to the Million Man March. You know, we went down, and my pastor at the time, Johnny Ray Youngblood, we took like, I think it was like 1,300 men that we took down there. And the concern was about, you know, we don't know how we're going to be set up and arranged with regard to the government. And that's always a fear when you have a mass demonstration that something could happen.
Exactly.
But it was the most peaceful day in the history of Washington, D.C. A day, unfortunate, that Martin and Malcolm could not have seen. You know, if they could have seen that gathering, which far exceeded the March on Washington. And I walked the entire mall, Capitol Street North, South, and the mall. So the numbers were well beyond 1 million men.
Oh, yes.
There were people in trees you couldn't see in photographs. You know, thinking about strange fruit, but the brothers were in the trees listening. But Martin, just you talked about that riot back in '43. There's an interesting photograph in your book.
In the book, yes, it is.
Of two white individuals holding a brother, and he's a bloody pulp. And I'm trying to determine whether these guys are helping him or they're just grinning because they've got this bloody black man.
That was like a really, and for a long time, that was considered like the major race riot in the country. And of course, the rebellion comes along. I think we lost.
Bro, I'm quite sure you don't agree that he'll get to the right place. And if you would classify his method as psychologically unrealistic, I think that if a man's method is psychologically unrealistic, which means the...
But anyway, that's a good point, though, Graham, in terms of looking at the disturbance at that time and what was going on with race relations, you know, in America. So in many ways, Black Detroit becomes to symbolize, you know, and capture the kind of zeitgeist, they say, what's going on in America at that time as it pertained to labor, the whole migration period going back to the 1920s and into the 1940s, the union movement in this country.
Yeah.
I mean, manufacturing, the arsenal of democracy that came as a result of World War II. So you begin to see, and then the model cities thing that came along, you know, with Kennedy and Johnson, you know, in terms of what they tried to do there. And many people thought in 1966, 67, that things were pretty rosy. And you know, what happened in Newark and what happened in Watts is not going to happen here in Detroit.
Right.
Ha, wrong.
Happened in New York too.
And New York, wrong completely in terms of Harlem in particular. But Harlem had a riot at the same period of time, though, that we had one in 1943. Wow. They had one right here in Harlem at the same period of time.
43?
Oh, yeah. You have a conjunction of what was happening in one part of the country was not uniquely different in another part of the country.
What started the riot?
Always bad rumors, misinformation that get out there. The one in 43 started at the Braddock Hotel.
Okay.
You know, the Braddock used to be right next to where the Amsterdam News is now. And the word got out that a soldier, you know, had been mistreated and had a relationship, I guess, with the Braddock was kind of a hot sheet joint at that time, you know. So the rumor got out, and next thing you know, one thing led to another. Same thing in Detroit. There was a rumor that some sailors had thrown a black child off into the Detroit River. Somebody ran into one of the nightclubs and made that announcement. I think it was in Paradise Valley down at Black Bottom. And then this word went from one person to another. Then people were in the street. Detroit is divided by Woodward Avenue. This incident here you have here, Graham, it seems like it was pretty close to where the real tension was the kind of the epicenter of the violence, because Woodward Avenue divided the community. It was almost like the railroad tracks in some of the other small communities. You're on the other side of the tracks. And so black people were accosted, assaulted, you know, and the cops came, you know, many of the police officers in Detroit had come from out of the South. So they had a certain kind of attitude when it came to the treatment of African-American people there. Of course. You know, they had to demonstrate that they could, we have an experience of dealing with them, you know, coming from Kentucky and Tennessee as they did. But most of that, the whole migration period is an important development, because by the 1920s, you got more than 100,000 people in that city, you know. And a good number of them were like these African Americans who would come from Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, principally. It was always like a straight line migration from Alabama. That's how my family, my mother came straight out of Tuskegee, Birmingham, Montgomery, Bessemer, straight on up to Detroit. You know, but that was before World War II. This is 1941 when she came up there, and she got domestic work. And then when the war broke out, and the whole the drafting and taking away the manpower out of the plants, the women went, white women in particular, Rosie the Riveter, you know, got those jobs, you know. So my mother, she had one of those jobs working in the factories, but when the war was over, back to the kitchen. Back to the kitchen, back to doing domestic work, you know, out in the suburbs of Detroit. So we moved around the city quite a bit. I kind of grew up all over the city, you know, maybe 2 or 3 years here, 2 or 3 years there, east side, west side, north end, Black Bottom. And consequently, it put me in touch with a number of people, all of whom I kept in my life. And when they open this book up, I hope they won't be too disappointed, you know, if they're not there, you know, because many people say, hey man, what about what we were, boom, boom, boom. And I said, well, I can't get everything in there, but I think we got some of the more vital and significant developments in the city. It's all there.
So is this,
and of course, Malcolm is there. You
this
know,
is a biography?
I mean, you know, it largely has, like I say, it has the memoir aspect of it. My memories, particularly as my mother, you know, she experienced that city, you know, coming out of Alabama. And, you know, what she does right now is absolutely remarkable. She still drives in the daytime.
Oh, really?
She doesn't drive Graham at night, but she drives in the daytime. She goes around at least twice a week to the food pantries. She gathers up food, and then she takes it back and dispenses it to the people who could not go to the
bless her
pantries. You bring them all
that's
kind of
beautiful.
vegetables and fruit, and canned goods, and
That's
what have you.
beautiful.
So a couple of weeks she didn't do it, and people just got to say, "Wait a minute, where's
she okay?
Catherine?" Yeah. She had surgery on her foot, so she was taken off her routine, and people miss that, you know. And
Yeah.
she feels good about that, and she's very active in the church there, Little Rock Missionary Baptist Church. So I mean, I let her know that this book will be out, and she'll get a chance. I'm sure she's going to have something to say about, because we go back and forth sometimes in terms of our memories, you know, like the different places we lived there. But for the most part, she's pretty sharp. You know, she retains all of that. You
97
know,
years old.
97, still doing it, man.
Wow.
But you know, more than anything, is to talk to a number of the activists there over the years.
Were you there Mother's Day?
I mean,
Were you there Mother's Day?
what's that?
Were you with your mother on Mother's Day?
Oh, yeah,
Of course.
true. I left Detroit. I mean, in 1985, I moved here to New York. But
Okay.
before, I lived here in New York a couple of times before, in short periods of time. But since 1985, I've been in New York. And one of the things I'm discovering as I do my history of Harlem is the kind of similarities of what was happening in Detroit and in conjunction what's going on in Harlem at the same historical periods. So it kind of cries out for the next book. You know, how you begin to connect these two cities, very important cities in the nation's history. You know, because they have a lot in common. You always go back to 1863 when they had the riot here.
Yeah, the draft riots of 1863.
Well, we had one in Detroit too, at the same period of time.
Now, the New York City riot, it was interesting because we had the influx of Irish immigrants into New York.
Yes.
Because of the potato famine, and the women came first, and they were required because the Irish were not white at that time. Because they weren't Anglo-Saxons, they could not live. They were Catholics. They could not live with normal white people. They had to live with the black people in Seneca Village, which has now been taken over by the west side of Central Park.
Yes.
Small community that was there. It's interesting how we're constantly displaced. Gentrification, they call it now.
Yeah, whole
but it's the
destruction
same
of Seneca
thing.
Village, yes.
But when the dock workers were on strike, when the men came over, when the Irish men came over, they found a number of them had, there were little children running around also as a result of the cohabitation. But there was a longshoreman strike. And the blacks were scabbing, and the term longshoreman comes from the fact that the Irishmen walked along the shore, ship to ship, to offload the goods, and that's how they made their money. So the term longshoreman comes from that practice.
Yes.
So while they were on strike, the Negroes were scabbing. And then Lincoln made the announcement that he was going to invoke a draft for the Civil War. And
Conscription Act.
Conscription, right. So they just went off. And it's interesting because Brooklyn was not part of New York City. Brooklyn was the city of Brooklyn, and you had Manhattan. So a riot broke out, and there was an orphanage on 23rd Street. I don't know if you know, a black orphanage.
Oh, sure.
And they burned that to the ground. The children got out.
Yes.
The police chief was beaten and left for dead in Lower Manhattan, but he survived.
Professor William Sorrell is pretty much the living expert on the colored orphan asylum. They call it the colored orphan asylum at that time. And he lives right there, right near 136th, 137th in Harlem. He teaches at Herbert Lehman College. But he, for about 20 years, have been doing research on what happened, you know, the incident that led up to it, the consequences of the people, how the children got out of there, and everything. He's done like a phenomenal amount of research. I think the book is out now. So Dr. William Sorrell.
Because that riot went from Manhattan into the city of Brooklyn. It went up what is now Flatbush Avenue, up to Crow Heights, Crow Hill, where black people were living at that time. And there were some Jews who were brought into the country in the 1850s. They were living up in Crow Hill with the blacks. But there were lynchings that took place in that area, what is now Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn. And there was a black cemetery on Eastern Parkway. Well, the subway is there now. And many of the black people living there fled down through Weeksville, and then from Weeksville they went out to Long Island, which is now what we call South Jamaica. And they settled in homes in what is now South Jamaica, but they never came back to the city of Brooklyn. Never came
Weeksville
back.
was kind of like a historical community.
Yes,
too,
the museum
wasn't it?
is well established. A dear lady who promoted that project, she passed about 5 years ago.
Yes.
Her name is escaping me. I knew her. She lived in a home a friend of mine owned. But she kept that project going, and they have built a new museum there, right in Weeksville, on Troy Avenue, I believe it is, on Troy
Yes.
And Dean. Troy and Dean, I think it is.
Yeah, yeah. And whenever they
Schenectady.
yeah, whenever they talk about these historic communities, they always have like. But in terms of Queens, St. Albans is always like one of the centers there in terms of a
James
concentration
Brown.
of African American people. Weeksville, but of course, doesn't go back as far as Seneca Village and Weeksville, or even Harlem for that matter, because a lot of people say, well, when did Harlem really come into existence? But you can go back to the 17th century. For Harlem's existence. Detroit goes back right to the early parts of the 18th century, in 1701. Is pretty much the founding date there when the Cadillac, the French explorer, came in. Dr. Clark would say, they didn't discover anything other than they were lost, in terms of, establishing the colonial possession, of territory and the extermination of the Native American population, And Michigan and Detroit went through similar phases and stages in terms of what happened with the indigenous people there and the subsequent arrival. It didn't have the kind of intense slavery that you recognize, not even in New York. Because New York at one time had more slaves than South Carolina.
Really?
Oh yeah, and when you're talking about, Graham, in terms of the riot of 1863, the draft riots, is that Fernando Wood, who was a mayor, his thing was to secede from the Union. So you see where the kind of attitude that prevailed in the populace at this time in terms of how they felt about that war. There was no gung-ho thing running down there, and as you absolutely right in terms of like the struggle over jobs. Because even in Detroit, when they have the riot there, the whole question of jobs is always critical. The economic conditions are critical. The housing situation is always critical. Because those are kind of basic elements that we're struggling for as a people.
And that's the problem that poor people struggle with. In this country, they try and pit one group against the other. But when you're all poor, that's the base level. It's not about your skin color. It's about your housing conditions. I remember growing up in East New York, which was a predominantly white neighborhood when I was a little boy. I mean, it was so white at times that I had been shot at about 6 or 7 times by white people. I got hit once. But everybody was fairly poor, not raggedy, but there were no wealthy or well-to-do people in East New York. And my Jewish classmates, we didn't even have Puerto Ricans until I got, I think, in the 5th grade or 6th grade.
In Brooklyn?
In Brooklyn. We didn't know what a Puerto Rican was. So there were a few Italians who could not go into the Roman Catholic Church 2 blocks from my house. The Italians were not allowed in that church.
Wow.
But
what year are we talking?
Even if they were Sicilian?
1950, definitely not. 1955, 1954, couldn't do it. So, and I never experienced that upfront racism, like, nigga, get out of here, you can't. That didn't exist. But you knew when you walked past a white person's house. As kids, we observe. Kids are very observant. We see a white person walking down the street. Okay. And we come past that yard, the dog would. So we knew that the people living in there didn't like black people. The dog was fine with white people walking by, but not black people. And but mostly, the Jewish people in East New York, Fortunoff You know, we used to shop in Fortunoff store because Fortunoff started in East New York, right underneath the L, under the New Lots line. And then as time went, when they started burning the buildings and everything into getting the insurance, they all went out to Woodmere and Valley Stream. But poor people need to understand, and in this country, with what we have going on now, people need to understand, like with the Health Care Act, you know, you got to be stupid to follow a congressman who has health benefits, lifetime for himself and his family, who gets a pension after 6 years in Congress. They get a lifetime pension, full salary, to think that because a black man brought a program to the table, they call it socialism. Well, if you don't want socialism, at age 65, reject your Social Security card. If you don't like socialism, reject paved roads. They don't get it, but poor people need to come together and understand they have so much more in common than not. And the system is designed to keep people butting heads. And we have to get beyond that. There are good and bad in every group.
You know what I want to do? I want to bring Gil Noble into this conversation and talk about Malcolm. And you know, Malcolm's birthday's coming up in a couple of days, and I really I think of Malcolm as our manhood, and we're all confused, and I really want to relate to how we deal with each other today and how we deal with each other yesterday in the past, with Malcolm and Martin, how they battled back and forth. And today we're battling with Obama. I had a convention with Sharpton 2 weeks ago, and a black nationalist or a rebel came in there and compared Obama to George Bush and blackface. And I took aback. Now, I thought you had some kind of sense, but, you know, why would you go that extreme? Obama and blackface? I mean, George Bush and blackface?
Is he talking the father or the son?
He's talking at a national convention in front of the Newark mayor. I forget his name, Smalls. We know him. He's a rebel here at M&N. But, I mean, this is the extremities of what brothers go to be mad at Obama. For him trying to bring socialistic ideas. Healthcare has been tried by everybody on the planet.
Every country has it.
Matter of fact, Trump was in front of the Australian Prime Minister, which he had the argument over the phone with. And suddenly he said, well, you understand, you have better health care than we have.
Australia.
And they have universal health care. Why is it in this country, of all these billions, Trump can give $500 million each, and all those people in his cabinet could give up $1 billion each. And we have socialism. I mean, health care for everybody. But let's show Gil Noble, number 2. Hopefully we can get this going this time, all right?
Okay.
And a little lessons from Gil.
Because what he was saying and the way he was saying it was too blunt. It was dangerous. And you didn't say those things in those days. I told you we had been socialized as kids to get around wrong, not to confront it. And Malcolm spoke in very declarative terms, and he said some terrible things about white people that we thought, but you would never express it, you see. He talked about the way this country was not a democracy but a hypocrisy, and he talked about what had been happening to us down south and up south. And he was not shy. He had and he was very, very intimidating. I'm man enough to admit it. There are a lot of people who are my age who will speak, you know, with love about Malcolm as though it had always been that way, but that's not so. He scared a lot of us to death. And then, mind you, I had this apartment, a bachelor apartment on Convent Avenue, and I'd been having a lot of fun, you know. And here he comes talking about a different way of life. First of all, he dropped his last name. Well, we had been socialized to take great pride in our last name. The more European it sounded, the better. There was not a flinch about, you know, noble. Oh, that's wonderful. If it wasn't French enough, you'd put an ETT on it, you know, to make it sound more French. And so here's a man who dropped his good last name and replaced it with an X. I thought the man was crazy. And then he talked about discipline. And he talked
self-discipline?
Self-discipline. He said that we do not believe in drinking. And at the time I would have a taste. And he said that we don't smoke cigarettes with or without a label on them. And I would smoke, you know, with a label.
Yes.
And he said we don't eat pork. Well, you know, I love me some ribs. And then he said we don't fornicate.
Yes.
And so psychologically I said, Malcolm, I'll see you later.
Yes.
You know, and all. But what he was doing in deprecating whiteness, I came to understand later that he was rearranging the balance that we needed, because we had glorified whiteness and deprecated blackness. And so he was tilting, using exaggerated terms, to give us a sense of self and to take whites down a little as they needed to be. And the discipline that he was talking about were things that we really needed to address. But I couldn't swallow that at the time. So jumping forward in time, a lot of things happened in the struggle, and Malcolm was struck down in '65, and I never went to hear him speak. My only impression of Malcolm was on the sound bites on the evening news. And if there was a rally in Harlem, where I'm living now, I'm living in Harlem, and he would have a rally 10 blocks away, I would go in the other direction.
Did he have a mosque there?
He had a mosque on 116th Street, and I didn't live too far away from there. But I went out of my way to avoid this man because I thought he was wrong. I had a white friend who was going to Princeton, and he called my wife and I one weekend, and he said, could you put me up over the weekend, because Malcolm X just came down to Princeton, and I never heard anything like that in my life. Blue eyes, pale skin, blonde hair. Could you put me up? I said, well, you can come on up here if you want to, you know. So he came up, and Sunday morning, he said, okay, I'm ready to go to the Rockland Palace. And we lived maybe 4 blocks from the Rockland Palace at the time in the projects. And he said, okay, let's go. I said, what do you mean, let's? You know? And so we had a big argument. I said, I'm not going to go there. Do you realize what he's been saying about you and your people? That's anathema to me. And we had a big argument, and he walked off and went down there on his own. And he came back whiter than when he left.
I bet he did.
Because he said that he had been put in a segregated section with no chairs. The white people had to stand. And Malcolm came out there and poured boiling oil over their whiteness, informationally. It was more intense than what he had done at Princeton, because in Princeton he had just demolished the heads of the academic departments there, theology, history, and whatnot. But here he was talking in more graphic terms, and he really gave this fella, Don Emerson, who we were friendly with, a shellacking. I said, I told you shouldn't have gone. And I said, the man is crazy, and I don't know why on earth you felt... And I was arrogant in my ignorance. And it wasn't until 1965, when he was assassinated, that there was a brother who lived in the projects. And he called me aside and he said, I'll tell you why Malcolm was killed. I said, what do you mean? He said, come on up to my apartment. So I went, and he gave me a recording he had made of Malcolm at one of his speeches. And so for the first time, I heard Malcolm unedited, in context.
I met one of his associates.
You see, that's so interesting, because, see, I didn't recognize Malcolm until he was dead. I mean, we always cherish our heroes when they die. I mean, this is our problem. I think we fight like cat and dogs. Like this past election, we feud back and forth about Hillary, and nobody dreamt that Trump would become president. Nobody could be that insane to vote for Donald Trump. I mean, and look where we're standing today. We're dealing with a I don't know, New York con. We know him very well as a racist New York con. And he's conned half of America. 62 million people voted for him. And this egomaniac has taken control, him and Putin together, doing what? The North Arctic, trillions of dollars in oil, Tillerson, head of Exxon, becoming Secretary of State. It's an obvious con. And they actually tried to do the lift sanctions, which were put on in 2014, to do this deal, $500 billion to start with. All right? So this is a fight over money, big time. Big time, all right? And now one of the Arabs from Bahrain set up meetings between, is this Illuminati or what? I mean, is it my imagination, or is it not Illuminati? I mean, the 1%ers on steroids?
You've got, he dimed out the Israeli Mossad to the Russians.
That was the,
the information. And
came from
I looked up, under the U.S. Code, I looked up treason under the U.S. Code, not in Webster's dictionary, because he will not be looked at through the lens of Webster. He's going to be examined through the lens of the U.S. Code. And one key word or phrase in there is giving aid to. Giving aid to the adversary. 2 senators, Democratic and Republican, called for his impeachment today. 2. And the numbers are going to go up. What he did, and it's not just Trump, you got to look at the whole cabinet here. The 25th Amendment might be invoked if the cabinet decides to take a vote along with the vice president and say, you know, this guy mentally is not stable, he can't govern, he's out.
There's one stumble block in that whole process, and that's Congress.
They got to go to Congress.
Got to go through that. Then it has to go to the Senate to have the trial, because the impeachment leads to the indictment.
Well, no, this is not the impeachment. The 25th Amendment is a proviso whereby the cabinet,
the whole whether or not he's
can
capable,
deem him incapable, because not just psychologically, just the fact that he's so embroiled with stuff, he can't leave. But let's look at the lineage here, because you got Trump, you've got Pence, and you've got the boy from the Congress, Ryan. Ryan is number 3.
And
so if Trump is out, Ryan becomes the vice president.
Is that right? That's
he becomes the vice president.
I forgot about
and you notice Ryan is sitting quietly. He's not doing a lot of talking.
He's backing him up.
He knows that if Trump goes down, booyah, he's the vice president. So he's being very quiet.
That's right.
Sessions has to go.
This is a plan, you know. This is a plan. I really believe this is a
plan
a chess game from day one, because they never dreamt that he would be president. They never, in their wildest dream. I mean, the Russians are, Putin must be dancing in the street. You know he's dancing in the street.
And Comey now.
And he,
Comey.
Well, he should.
But that's the most critical thing on the table right now is Comey's memo.
His notes. And I'm going to tell you, he does have his notes. When I spoke with somebody, I was a detective. Right? This is what we do. We talk to you. I've done interviews 2 hours long. I don't take notes. I don't take notes. You know why I don't take notes? I want you to feel free to talk to me. If you were talking to me and I'm writing down like this, you wouldn't be talking to me.
You're on guard.
So my partner and I are doing an interview. And if you're a suspect, see, I'm gonna take your stuff, turn it inside out, over and around, around.
Yeah, but Graham, you could be wired, baby.
Could be wired. I've done that too. I've done that too.
That's a concern now, whether these things in the White House were taped.
And usually, White House meetings are taped, but they went into an area where there is no electronic penetration or surveillance. I forgot. It's called not the crypt. It's not like it's like a bunker, but
yeah.
Nothing can penetrate that electronically to absorb any information. But what we do, we get through talking to you, we go back to our office.
Quickly get it all down.
This investigator on such and such a date, such and such a time, interviewed so-and-so. Mr. So-and-so stated to me, blah, 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 blah. I inquired, he replied. It's all typed out.
All right,
and
so
you may not need it. You may not need it today, but you'll have it.
He goes on testifying within the next week, and he says that Trump did ask him to drop the case on Mike Flynn, and he's guilty. He's already owned up to it. But how many
that's
times?
Obstruction of justice.
Right.
Of course it is.
Clearly is.
But they get what the
violation
Republicans
of the oath of
having
office
all the
from the
power.
constitutional standpoint
But
too,
see,
which may be more critical.
But the Republicans know he's dead wrong. He said, well, he's a rookie, and we're going to give him a break, let him fall all over himself. But look at what we got. We got control of the White House, we got the Congress, and we got 2 years. Look at all the stuff we could do. But Trump is just setting everybody up.
Trump and the Russians are.
And the Russians. He's a Russian spy, plain and simple.
He's a weak-minded,
Well, that's a violation of the Espionage Act.
Well, there you go. But can you imagine what Putin has on him?
Right.
Dancing girls during 2014, during the Miss Universe contest.
Oh yeah.
When he was in Russia, you know Trump, his normal game is to have 4 or 5 in the room.
Look at what he said about his own daughter.
Well, he
said his own daughter. If she wasn't his daughter, he'd be sleeping with her.
He's been a playboy.
What decent man looks at his daughter in that light?
Well, that's the 70s mentality.
No, that's his grandfather. That's his grandfather.
We'll go back to that.
The pimp and the prostitute.
He's
grandfather.
a sleaze. I mean, he's a. I call him a wise guy. You know,
they
he's
had
in
better
with
smarts. Don't insult the wise guys. They had
What do you
better
think
smarts
Malcolm
than he
would
had.
be saying about all
That's
this?
when wow.
Okay,
Tell us.
we're on the same page. We're on the same page, okay.
What would he be saying?
Right. Well, I think one of the things, and you said something earlier, though, in terms of our heroes and not giving them the propers.
That's right.
The honors, the tributes, the respect that they deserve, and they can smell the roses, you know?
Yeah.
It's amazing that in a minute I'll be 2 times, I guess I'm already 2 times older than Malcolm when he was assassinated.
39.
Right. Never thought I'd live this long, you know.
Yeah.
But
You're going to live longer,
I mean, but it's amazing. Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Mother's 97. Look at that.
But the thing about it is that, and Dr. King too, they're both 39.
Right.
Snuffed out. And we can add to that. I mean, the list is long. Medgar Evers, Frantz Fanon, you know, all these here younger people that we lost, you know, who were just at the peak of the height of their, what you call political and mental and philosophical and ideological development. Malcolm, in 1964, I think that was, as you move into 65 and that whole transitional period we talked about, his international perspective.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was
Was
blowing up.
just absolutely had been
blowing up.
sharpened to the degree that he was ready now. He had already sat, traveling across North Africa and the Middle East with just about all of the significant leaders of those nations.
Well, see, that was my whole point, to show the beginning,
In the
where he
beginning,
started
yes.
off at the Oxford debate. Just
Yes.
at the end of his life, he said, well, I'll work with anybody. I don't care what color you are. I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm at the point, I've evolved, man. I
And
don't
that's
see
part of the
color
Mecca.
anymore.
That was a part of the
That was
Mecca
part of the
experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
coming
That
out of
and
So
like,
Mecca.
I'm
it was-
saying we
Yes.
as a people, we have to evolve. We have to learn from Malcolm.
Yes.
And I'll show you the petty debates that he had with, I had another piece here where we show when he opened up and talked about Martin being a Tom and all this other stuff in the early days. But you see the Oxford debate, he had matured, he had been around the world, he had learned to judge by the content of their character.
Well, about a week and a half ago, we had some very rare film footage. I thought sure you would be there with us, Winston, over at Lincoln Center.
Oh, I love it.
Libert Bethune,
Okay.
we call him Sandy.
Yeah.
He was in Paris when Malcolm came through, and eventually went off to London with him too when he had the Oxford debate.
Wow.
Now, all this is like early December of 1964, right?
Okay.
At the same time that he's moving like this here, Louis Farrakhan, Louis X now, he was Louis X then, he's putting out these bad notices and information about Malcolm through Muhammad Speaks. He's a man worthy of death.
Yeah.
They had images,
Yeah.
man. So it's kind of ironic that Malcolm is over here making headway, with all these international leaders, almost invited to speak before the OAU.
Yes.
They never allowed him to do that, but at least the petition and his declaration, his statement was circulated. So much so there was some concern coming from the American, the U.S. State Department and the CIA, and he knew he was being shadowed.
Yeah.
And I think we, working with his daughter, Ilyasa,
Yeah.
we kind of nailed who the CIA, it's pretty circumstantial, but we feel that he was the one who had been assigned to shadow Malcolm.
Yeah.
All moving through, because he's popping up in these different places. It's amazing the kind of the incidental encounters that he has with Malcolm. So Malcolm had the suspicion that he was under surveillance, but he was looking for this white man. It'd be a black man.
Yeah.
And so
Spooking somebody
Malcolm,
doing.
he should have known he couldn't have known because he's assassinated before all of the information come out about how they had they infiltrated his whole organization. It was at least 5 BOSS men inside of his organization, including Gene Roberts.
Yeah, that's right.
Gene Roberts was right there,
He
number
fessed up.
one.
He actually went on tape and talked about it.
Exactly. I interviewed him and took him up to the Audubon Ballroom and everything and made him recount everything. And I asked him, I said, well, what role did you have in the assassination of Malcolm X? He said, well, Malcolm meant more to us alive than dead. Because they had penetrated his organization to the extent they knew everything he was doing. Huh, Graham? How do you feel about that?
So Farrakhan was responsible for it? You think Farrakhan was responsible for Malcolm's death?
Well,
just by him setting the temperature. I mean, we were all there. I was there.
And Dr. Clark.
I mean, I went to a meeting. I went to a meeting during those days. He died. I was 24, so I was aware. And I went to a meeting, boy, and everybody was angry at Malcolm. When Malcolm died, you couldn't find any place to bury him.
Well, Percy Sutton, who was his attorney at that time, scrambled all over the place, and they finally got up here where I live.
Yeah, the Lido Theater.
647th up there at the church there.
Amsterdam Avenue, on 47.
That's right.
I was raised across the street from there, 1749 Amsterdam.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they had with Ossie Davis. They've torn that church down now. It used to be an old Jewish synagogue. Because
it was a Lido theater.
Oh yeah, they tore it
40s.
down. They
It was
tore
a Lido theater in the 40s.
They moved around the corner. The
Okay.
church itself, you know, moved it. This
Well,
is
they changed
Temple.
that. That was a.
It moved around the corner, but that's where they had the funeral there. And I teach a course on Malcolm, and I took my students over there. And we had a chance to talk to Carla, who's the woman who kind of runs the funeral parlor next door and everything.
Oh yeah, I know,
yeah.
that's right.
And she kind of gave us the background, because Stanley was the man who used to be the kind of superintendent of the building, the janitor and everything.
Okay.
He died. And so he would always open the doors up at that church and allow all my students to come in there, and he would show us a Star of David about this size of this table right in the middle of the floor there. And even on the front of the building, you have the Star of David there. And you know, it used to be a Jewish community. It was a Jewish community. You look at Michigan's, it's still right up, the sign on Michigan's is still right there on 145th Street. The old pharmacy that used to be there.
We had it in Brooklyn. We had Fulton Street in Brooklyn.
But I think Malcolm, you know, in terms of where he was evolving, how he was evolving, many people, I read a piece this morning where one of my friends, Norman Richmond, out of Canada, and he was speculating that Malcolm was moving more and more in a socialist way. He was becoming a socialist. I mean, it's a lot of room for that speculation in view of how he was embraced by that time by the militant movement, the Socialist Workers' Party, provided the forums for him to speak, and Pathfinder Press put out all of those speeches and everything. So I can understand Malcolm being very, very sympathetic and open, you know, to the SWP and the militants and what have you. It's not to say that he was never going to be joining up with them, but he saw him as a useful transitional thing, because he no longer has Muhammad Speaks.
Okay.
So he has no real press outlet other than what A. Peter Bailey was doing with the Black Lash. That was their publication. They had about 5 or 6 of those coming out. So this was an opportunity to use Pathfinder Press, you know, and use the militant forums that they set up. He had Fannie Lou Hamer joined him on one of those, again showing Malcolm was beginning to reach out, you know, to the people he used to castigate. You know, the whole Big Six and everything, he tamped that down. And having Fannie Lou Hamer and members of SNCC join him, showing that he was sensitive to where the whole civil rights movement was going.
Well, time to go.
Oh, yeah.
And
I'll keep you
Black
on notice
Detroit
on that. I'll keep you on notice in terms of...
this is a must read. All right?
Thank you.
So by the time he comes back next time, we will have read it.
I'll come back.
And we'll review it. But happy birthday, Malcolm. And the whole purpose of this program is to show you how we need to honor our leaders today. Now, Obama is still alive and well. Let's pay homage. Power to the people. The God in me loves the God in you, and stay tuned for more of the Gilchrist Experience. And hallelujah.
Yabo.
And watch Donald Trump. He's going down. God bless you.
I'm up to number 16 at the Amsterdam
News
now. Oh, make America great again, Trump. Let's go.
Wait, let me give you this. Let me give you this.
Make America
I just finished number 16 today, and then we're going to come back with the Declaration of 17 that Norman Siegel pulled together. That's going to be another of our editorial this week.
Okay.
He laid out, he rewrote the Declaration of Independence. In terms of policies and practices of President Trump and reasons to remove him. Boom.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, people have been signing up. We have hundreds and hundreds of people who can go online and look under Declaration 17. And that's what it's all about, a rewriting of the whole Declaration of Independence that Norman Siegel did. It's a nice piece of literature.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So that'll be one of our editorials this week.
He used to be on your board.
For the,
he's not there anymore.
I guess we can strip out of here, huh?
Yes.
Take this
I want to make
Well, you keep this one, Graham, since he didn't show up. You have to get his later.
I require a signature.